I'm Zim, and this is the Helpful Photographer Podcast in collaboration with New York City Photo Safari. To register for a safari, please visit newyorkcityphotosafari.com. A lot of people tell me that the biggest stumbling block to Photoshop is understanding layers. It's actually quite easy. So let's jump in. Imagine this. Let's say you found an old photograph in a box. Yeah, I'm talking about a printed photograph, the old-fashioned way. And this is the only copy you have, but it's not a great print and you'd really like to make some changes to it. Now, you could pull out some paint and just start painting right on top of it, but you know you're not very good at it. So instead of painting directly on the print, which would change it permanently, you take a piece of glass and you put it on top of the photo, and you paint on the glass instead. And every time you make a change, you put another layer of glass on top. As you look at the image through the layers of glass that you've put down on top, the effect is cumulative. So the photo is a culmination of all the layers you've put on top. If you had filled one of those sheets of glass, let's say with red paint, well, guess what? You will now have a red image because you would no longer be able to see the original image, which is on the bottom. However, if you just wanted to tinge the image red, you would put a very thin, transparent coat of red on that sheet of glass, just like rosy-colored sunglasses. In this way, if you decide that you don't like the effect of any sheet of glass, then you would simply remove that sheet of glass. This would leave your original image intact. What you're doing with each sheet of glass is what layers is to Photoshop. It's like putting a sheet of glass on top of your image, where you'll make all your changes to the image. So if you make a mistake or you don't like what you did, you can simply remove or change that particular layer, just like removing a sheet of glass. The nice part about Photoshop layers is that you can turn the layer on and off by clicking the eyeball symbol next to the layer. As you toggle the symbol, you can see what it looks like before and after. And if you don't like the layer at all, you can simply delete it or turn it off for the time being. One of the great uses for layers is watermarking. By adding your logo or signature on a layer above your image, you can move it around, change the size, or even change the opacity as you see fit. And then you can export the image to a JPEG or a TIFF to permanently embed it before you share the file. And if you don't like it down the line, you can go back to your Photoshop file and change it any way you like because it sits on its own layer and it's not embedded into the image itself. As you can see, there's a lot of different things you can do with layers. The main reason you'll want to work in layers and not on the image itself is because edits in Photoshop are considered destructive. In other words, once you make a change, save it, and close the file, it's basically permanent. To reverse that edit, you would literally have to retouch the image. And since most of the time when we're working in Photoshop, we're making multiple complex changes, this can be very problematic. Let's take the watermark example. You've now placed your watermark where you want it, but you don't use layers, and then you decide to change the contrast and the saturation and so on. You've changed the entire image, including that watermark. If you decide at this point that you placed that watermark in the wrong place, you have to undo all of your changes, including the contrast and the saturation and all those other edits, just to undo the watermark. And this is only possible if you didn't save and close the file. On the other hand, if you had done each of these things on separate layers, you can simply delete or disable the layer. In the watermark situation, you would simply move the watermark to the top layer so that it's not affected by any of the contrast or saturation changes. Again, if you didn't do this in layers, it's like dumping paint on a print and then trying to remove that paint once it dries. One more thing about layers. When you're working in layers, you can also add something called a layer mask. Let's say you have a photo of an apple, and you want to darken the background, but not the apple itself. What you can do is add an exposure layer to the image and then create a mask. The mask would be placed over the area you don't want darkened. In this case, the apple. Or you could reverse the mask and only darken the apple and not the background. In this way, you can control each part of the image that the layer affects. There's a whole lot more you can do with layers, but for now, I hope that took the stress out of using Photoshop. Just remember, layers help make changes reversible, and the effects of layers are cumulative, just like adding more and more sheets of glass with more and more layers of paint on it. I hope that was helpful. Until next time, keep on shooting.